Cheers, guys. Epix 911. Welcome to VR Podcast, Episode 6. Excited about this episode because we've got some really interesting topics. Not that I didn't like yesterday's. Let's just say I'm a little bit more excited about today's. We're going to start things off with my time at Electronic Arts. Reason is it ties into the first story, which has to do with Microsoft's Garage division. This is the division rather responsible for downtime for employees. And right now, they've got a huge focus on virtual reality exposure for their employees. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about games I've got on the go, an article asking whether Facebook has given up on the Rift, eye tracking, which is a really interesting topic because of the ramifications for eye tracking, both positive and negative. And then lastly, WearVR. These guys are a company whose primary goal at the moment is to breathe new life into those DK1 and DK2 era apps that were never upgraded for the commercial devices. So lots of neat things to talk about. Let's start off with the first, Electronic Arts. When I think back of places I've worked at, Electronic Arts easily the most nostalgic for me, the one with the best memories. Some of the most tedious, but the majority of the best memories. Don't get me wrong, last 17 years from a professional level, furthering my career, fantastic. Salary-wise, no complaints. Made it to senior management, all of that kind of stuff. Bought the house, the picket fence, blah, blah, blah. But it was those first 3.5, 4 years out of university with my comp science degree at Electronic Arts that were among, like I said, my favorite. So I'm out of school, that typical cocky attitude that I'm going to conquer the world, be a game programmer, life is going to be good, and then reality. Never was really able to do what you need to do as a game programmer, and that's actually, finish a game. Have demos, have a portfolio. So let's just say that didn't go very far at all. And after many months, I was pretty damn discouraged. Exidy telling me all the while, dude, you got to apply at Electronic Arts. I didn't want to because it didn't sound like, it felt like giving up. Working for the quality assurance department, which is where Exidy worked, affectionately known by other employees at EA as the stables. Yeah, as in barnyard stables, manure and all. That's kind of how they viewed QA. But I relented. I had to start paying back my student loans, applied, had the most intimidating interview still of my whole life. 3-panel interview, chat for another day. Got the job, became a software tester, and I was in the same era as Adam Boyes, who went on to become a VP at Sony, Gio Corsi, who LucasArts, now Sony himself, and a bunch of other people that went on to be game programmers, artists, production people, etc. Loved it. The hours, absolutely rough, though. When you were on a project, the FIFAs, the NHLs, that's what that division was known for in Canada, the Vancouver division, the Need for Speeds and NHLs. You worked long hours, 16-hour days, absolutely common, 6 days a week. So when I got to go home at 5 o'clock on a Sunday, guys, it felt awesome. Here, I was able to have 4 hours to myself. I missed a lot of my kid growing up, which sucked. She was a toddler at the time. I drive to work in the summer in the dark and come home, and Vancouver doesn't get dark till 9:30 in the summer. I drive home in the dark. But where they excelled was in terms of employee treatment, at least for the stables, during our downtime, the in-between projects. Nowadays, yeah, they pretty much lay you off. But back then, they kept their testers and they nurtured them and mentored them. And I like to say, taught us a lot. So we would have anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks in between projects. And after the days off that they would give us, they actually gave us, in addition to vacation time off, we would come into work. I kid you not, you can ask anybody from that era, and we were paid to play video games. Play, I joke, because testing is not playing. But no, I would come in, clock in, play StarCraft. Land StarCraft for 8 hours, weeks at a time, Diablo, MAME emulation. In short, it was freaking awesome. They provided food, they had arcade games, employee discounts. You could rent, or not rent, but sign out video games like a library. And I think the limit was like a dozen. So here I was, armfuls of games on weekends to play that weekend. And I'm not going to say if I copied them or not. We'll leave that to your imagination. Let's just say life was pretty good. Ended up then working for Help Desk, the tech serve department, and quickly realized I wasn't going to be a programmer. I had no finished projects, which you kind of need to do. You can't talk about making games. You actually, have to make them. And being around wonder kids like Kevin Piquel, who could speak to you in binary, they ate, slept, and breathed code. Let's just say I was out of my league. So went into the networking angle and eventually management. No complaints there. But it was how they treated employees back then that just made it feel like family, made it feel like a team. Fast forward, Microsoft. So Microsoft, they haven't escaped that type of criticism, right? The tedious hours of employees, etc. But they also do have a degree of leisure for employees. And their garage division right now is a perfect example of that. So what they've done is they've got rooms kitted out with the best audio, the best visuals, specifically for virtual reality. And if you think they're only going to have mixed reality devices for employees to get inspired with, no, they've got Rifts, they've got Vives, they've even got Sony PlayStation VR consoles configured for employees on their downtime to go in and play and get inspired. You can watch your fellow employees on the massive wall-covered screens. In short, awesome. And if that isn't enough, they've got entire rooms dedicated to the HoloLens, green screen, motion capture, all again for leisure. That's the kind of mentality, I think, that not only is it good for employee retention, but inspiring employees, not having employees feel like it's a prison. And I know the US, unlike Canada and Europe, isn't as generous with time off, right? Vacation time. It's not uncommon to work many years and still only have a week or two vacation time. That's kind of the norm, the gist of it from all the American friends that I have and having worked for a company that was US and Canadian. Let me know if there's any of you listening that happen to be Microsoft employees. We know the Googles and Apples have similar things, but I love this focus on virtual reality because it's a fantastic way to get employees inspired to do more than the tasks and the projects that they may be on. And what I mean by that is one of the things I hated most, and how this story continues to kind of tie in to my time at EA, is I hated the aspect of testing games in the sense that by the time I was finished, I was so freaking sick of that game. We got a free copy at the end of the project, every one of us. I always gave it away. And to date, have not played any of the games that I worked on because I was so damn sick of them. It's the same for a lot of employees that are devs for games, which is a shame. Imagine loving RPGs, but working on a game like Divinity Original Sin 2, one of the best RPGs out, but you can't enjoy it because, well, you know all the spoilers, how the game ends, every single bug, you know the game warts and all. So having this type of leisure stuff, just absolutely fantastic for employees to get them excited because I didn't play those games, but there was enough of an atmosphere that showed us the the fun side of gaming as well, with the StarCraft and Diablo and the MAME emulation and everything else, that they kept you excited about gaming, right? Not just the horrible aspects of it, i.e. the long and tedious hours. So I like that. It remains to be seen what is going to become of that, though. Who knows? Perhaps it leads to something exciting, though. Employees so inspired by a Rift experience, or maybe it's an employee like me trying Resident Evil 7 on the PlayStation VR and saying, you know what? There's not a heck of a lot of good horror games. Getting an idea and then pitching that to Microsoft, and maybe that leads to a fantastic horror game down the road for the mixed reality devices. In short, I think it's amazing, and just really encourage other companies, if they can, if the resources are there, to do similar things. It's yet another way to push VR forward, in my opinion. So on the go in terms of gaming, it's still Audio Shield for me, big time back into Elite Dangerous, and Fallout 4 VR, still playing that, and then the 3DS stuff outside of that. Well, we're talking big companies, we're talking gaming. Let's talk about social VR and Facebook. There's an article today, and I'll have the link for it in the description, talking about, or rather asking the question, has Facebook given up on Rift? If we go back to just the last week and we judge Rift on CES alone, yeah, you could come to that conclusion, absolutely. There wasn't a hell of a lot going on for the Rift. Lots of Vive, lots of everything else. Now, no reason really to be alarmed, because we know the MO of Oculus/Facebook, and that's typically that they keep the announcements to their own shows. And when does that usually happen? At Connect, which is in the fall. But we usually get a peek of some stuff at E3. So yeah, it doesn't completely surprise me, but no real reason for me personally to kind of sound the alarm bell. Also, it depends on if you take them at their word. You got to remember, Facebook's leader himself, right, Zuckerberg, stood up before a lot of the whole trough of disillusionment for VR to say, yeah, this is something we're in for the long haul. And then he reiterated that after, when all those articles about is VR failing were coming out, remember, at the tail end of 2016, he took to the stage at events to say, so what? This is a long haul game. This is a 6 to 10 year commitment. If you take him at that face value, there's nothing to worry about. If instead you think that was something he said out of necessity, but in the background they're panicking, they'd spent all this money and they don't feel it's going in that direction, again, I'm personally not that worried. Look at kind of how they started. Like them, hate them. I'm not a big Facebook fan personally. Yeah, I've got an account and I use it professionally, etc. But it's not something I spend any amount of time on. Definitely don't play Facebook games, and other than using it to chat with relatives, that's about the extent of it. But look at how they started. They started at a time when MySpace was dominant. It took them a little while. They weren't immediately successful out of the gate. They had early success, but it was fought for, and it took a while to get to that point. I think it was 2009 when they finally surpassed MySpace. So it was a couple of years on the go for them to do that. A lot of their changes and objectives along the way have been longer term. Not a lot of stuff they do, well, other than, I guess, the knee-jerk reactions when they make updates that infuriate users. Those types of things they seem to be able to do on the fly. But a lot of the other stuff is longer term. In terms of their goals at the beginning, to have hundreds of millions of people on board this device, based on the MySpace numbers, a lot of people scoffed, said, yeah, it's never going to happen. They're not going to get there. Look at them now. However you want to break those stats down, they're over 1 billion. And that's a pretty significant achievement. Again, whether you like them or not, they've done pretty well in that respect. So personally, I'm not worried. I still love my Rift, but I love VR in general. If there's one complaint that I would have with them is just that little bit of resistance still to truly embrace openness. They've got no problem from the point of view of furthering their own device, and you know what, you could say rightfully so, right? Having their Steam VR presence. Look, that's been good for them. They're pretty much on par, purchase-wise, gameplay-wise, with the Vive on arguably the Vive's native platform, even if that's not the intent of OpenVR. Whereas Oculus Home, other than Gear VR, their other device, doesn't really cater to any other devices that are out there. What I think they're going to have to embrace eventually is being more open. And we're seeing glimpses of that, right? Perfect examples of that are with some of the compatibility third-party programs to play their games on the other device. That's a case in point where, yeah, they had initial resistance, hardcore resistance, and then they softened their stance to the point where they don't even acknowledge it anymore. And it's quietly been okay ever since. I expect over time, they're going to loosen the reins even more. Not just out of benevolence, right? But I think out of necessity. And I think Mark and, more importantly, the team assigned to Rift recognizes that. So, in summary, not worried. How about you guys? What are your thoughts on that? Do you see things a little different? Let me know. So, this next topic, really interesting to me, is eye tracking. And what I love about eye tracking is the potential for it. Positive, mostly, but we're going to have to talk about the negatives as well. If we look at wireless for 2018, I would say the potential for eye tracking is kind of just below the priority of wireless for these companies. Look at Apple, even though they're not really doing VR at the moment, it's more augmented reality. But look at Google, at Facebook themselves. They've all acquired or invested in companies that research or implement eye tracking solutions. So what are some of the advantages of it? Well, for me, just like I get excited about the combat aspect in VR with a crazy amount of hitbox potentials. In other words, as fluid as your movement is in combat is the ability to inflict damage on an opponent. I'm not going to beat that to death, but I love the example of being able to take out an opponent's left hamstring or his right Achilles tendon. That kind of localized damage, we're going to see that at some point in VR, and it's going to be brilliant. Likewise, the potential for eye tracking, maybe in more subtle ways, equally as important, I think. The example I love to think about is RPG character interaction. So you're playing an RPG. One way that a lot of games go about that, take Divinity 2 Original Sin that I was talking about earlier, and you've got skills like bluffing, etc. Maybe as a part of your character. If you make that bluff roll, select the right choice in the dialogue tree, you can advance the story and be successful in your bluff. Well, with eye tracking, you could take that to the whole next level. Imagine having that conversation with an NPC. They ask you a question, and maybe they're testing you on something, whether you've stolen an object. That object happens to be in the VR space that you're chatting with this character in. Well, if they can detect your eyes focusing or moving to that object during the conversation, that could get flagged as the AI saying, wait a sec, and you could fail that bluff check, for example. I mean, that's just one perhaps a sloppy example, but an example of where I think they can use eye tracking to just really increase artificial intelligence, dialogue trees. There's all kinds of potential there. Of course, the foveated rendering itself can benefit from that. And we're going to talk about something called heat mapping in the positive sense, and then kind of the negative things the devs can do with that info. In terms of the positives, what heat mapping does, and I'll just describe it quickly, is developers can track in a given application or game where your gaze is resting. Now, without eye tracking, it's generally the position of your head, and they got to extrapolate a little bit, and there's a certain amount of guessing at the end of the day, but they get a general idea of where you are looking the most. So if you're talking about foveated rendering, that could help the devs just from a technical point of view decide, okay, where and how do they want to focus the foveated rendering? How large should that section of high detail be before it kind of gets into the low detail? What area are players spending the most time looking at? Maybe you increase the textures, by a huge margin in those areas. In other words, if there's parts of the game that players never kind of stop to look at, well, from a performance point of view, you could skimp on those areas. But maybe there's places where they do really stop, soak in the eye candy. You could enhance those. The ramifications for people with beefier systems, lower end systems, are huge. They can streamline. They can optimize. We talked about that so much the last few weeks. Just all kinds of crazy potential for eye tracking just from a development point of view. Never mind actually using it in game. That's just to help them along. The research and development, the design doc stages of apps or games. There's a negative associated with that, and you may already know where I'm going with this, and that is advertising. By the same token, if they know where you spend most of your time looking, let's take WebVR as an example, a VR-based web browser. They can see how effective ad campaigns are based on the data that they've mined from you, right? Taken against what you spend most of your time looking at. Maybe you like certain crustacean websites, prawn, etc. Well, yeah, advertising could be targeting specific things because they now know that about you. So yeah, there's a dangerous side and a privacy side to the heat mapping as well. But again, made possible with eye tracking. Then you've got the stuff like better targeting, better user interfacing. So you could do a lot with people who have needs that are maybe not as able-bodied as you or I. Well, suddenly, look at Stephen Hawking, for example, what he might be able to do with eye tracking and a breathing device, breathe out a tube paired with eye tracking, and you could tailor some massively customized, really sophisticated user interface for him and others who share those disabilities. So in short, yeah, massive, massive potential. Another one, social VR apps. I know I don't get into social VR apps a lot, and I've made, which to date has been a pretty empty promise about spending more time on them in the future, and I do intend to do exactly that. But something that pops to mind with eye tracking and social VR would be seeing other people when you interact with them. Let's say you've got a really lifelike avatar. Well, being able to read body language of somebody else, which is something that's so important in real life. Humans have really evolved and adapted to be able to understand, of course, Asperger's and the autism spectrum kind of deviate from that a little bit. But for the most part, if you're not on that spectrum, we've got a good innate evolved ability to read body language, body cues. And a lot of that plays out with the eyes. So suddenly with eye tracking, the ability to see somebody that you're interacting with's eyes moving just makes that encounter in social VR so much more realistic. So super excited about eye tracking. And personally, I think that's kind of their next thing after wireless. Hopefully we don't wait too long for that. We're going to require some type of convergence along the way. I do think it'll happen. And guys, when it does, it's going to be marvelous. Did I miss anything? Are there other areas you can think of where eye tracking could benefit? Let me know. Lastly, let's talk WearVR. So this is a company that has some cool goals. First and foremost, they had a look at applications that were around for the DK1 and DK2 that never got updated. And they thought that was a shame because there were some early gems. And one for me that stands out is the Tuscany demo. This was a demo that you saw on pretty much every single VR hype show, marketing show that was out back then during that era, where they would have from young people to the elderly try out the Tuscany demo. And it was basically a house. I think it was along a cliff, right? With some trees, mountains in the distance. And it was used with much lower resolution devices at the time. Sadly, from what I could see, and I haven't researched it beyond, into too much depth, but yeah, that was for DK1 and DK2. I don't believe it's CV1 compatible or Vive or PlayStation VR. If I'm wrong and let me know. But that's just an example, right? There's other ones out there. And when you consider the install base, which for that Tuscany app alone, it was between 100 and 500,000 installs on the Android store. We also know that as of summer, was it summer? Yeah, I think July, August 2015, 175,000 DK1/DK2 units had been shipped to wherever they were shipping. I don't know if it was globally, specific regions. So between that and when the commercial launch, probably tens of thousands of more. So we're looking at a number of possibly close to 250,000 units out there, where the reverse is also true. Not a lot of the modern stuff is compatible. So they've got a contest right now. It's a $10,000 competition for devs of apps from back then in that era to make them compatible with current day devices. Rift, CV1 version, Vive, PlayStation VR, Daydreams, etc. So I think that's fantastic. The reason I wanted to talk about that, though, is the other potential there is possibly making the modern apps work with those older devices. Now, that one really boils down to how worth it is it from a resource point of view. If it's an easy thing to do, look, that is another potential way to market the device. There were people who got the DK1, DK2, and never took it beyond that. The majority, possibly developers, but there were consumers in there. I contemplated it at one time as well. Should I get a DK2 unit? I held off because I wanted the, best resolution, whatever they were going to launch with and all those features. Ultimately, I held off. I'm sure the reverse is true. There were people who got the DK2. Maybe they were disappointed with aspects of VR that have since been remedied. What a fantastic way to maybe market to them, to kind of get them into the fold, right? Take a modern app, make it compatible with those devices. From a performance point of view, that might be pretty beneficial. The DK1 had a lower native resolution, so some of the more demanding apps paired with the better graphic cards of today and CPUs might run those apps better. Sure, they're going to be pixelicious compared to, the 1080p units, but what a fantastic way for those DK1 people to experience the modern apps and maybe, give them incentive to purchase the newer units. But back to their objective, which is just to get those apps compatible. I think that's a really cool idea. Can't wait to see what the result of that is. Well, guys, that's it for the show. Like I said, just some interesting topics. This is what I love about virtual reality and the passion that I share, that so many of you share with me about virtual reality. And it's that it's always kind of, at least at this stage, equal parts what we're doing with it, what we hope it's going to do, and what it could do in the future for us. And it's like we're all going along on this crazy trip, this crazy journey together. And damn it, if it isn't exciting. And once in a while, when I talked about eye tracking and what people look at the most, we do got to kind of stop and enjoy and be grateful and happy with what we have, what we've had to date. Because it's been pretty damn significant. Look at older technologies. The Commodore 64 was relevant for a decade and a half without innovation. The pace of innovation we've seen just in the last year and a half, never mind a decade and a half, it's been awesome, right? We went from Rift units that were using game pads to pretty much a one-to-one attach rate with touch controllers now. You don't think of the Rift without the touch anymore. It's just part and parcel of it now. Vives, with the Vive Pro looming on the horizon, and the wireless, and well, you guys know I'm preaching to the choir, but damn it if it isn't an awesome time to be a gamer and to be excited about stuff. So with that, guys, let's end this Thursday. Tomorrow is Gaming Friday. Hopefully you guys have had a fantastic week to date. Have a good Thursday night, and we will catch you tomorrow for VR Roundup. Oh, and a reminder, I'm going to be joining the guys over at VR Roundtable for a chat on Saturday. That video should be online Monday. Guys, as always, cheers.